Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world, welcome back to the Caring Economy with me, Toby Usnik. Today, we're joined by Dawn Pinnock. She's the newly appointed president and CEO of the Center for Urban Community Services, or CUCS. Dawn is making history as the first woman and person of color to lead this organization in its 45-year mission to combat homelessness in New York City. With nearly 3 decades of experience in developing critical programs for underserved communities, Dawn brings a wealth of knowledge and fresh perspective to CUCS. And as we all know, sadly, across this country and many parts of the world, homelessness is a real crisis right now that's happening. So I'm really honored and thrilled to have Dawn with us to talk about this important issue and maybe some of the solutions and how we can all get involved. So Dawn Pinnock, welcome to the Caring Economy.
Thank you. Thank you, Toby. I'm very happy to be here.
So Dawn, we always begin by asking our guests to give us like 3 or 4 minute digest of their lives. I know that's a lot for such a robust life that you've led, but can you give us a sense of where you were raised, how you were raised, who maybe mentored you or pivots along the way?
Absolutely. So I'm Dawn Pinnock, and I'm a proud native New Yorker. I say that loud and proud in every space I occupy. I'm also a proud product of the public school system. I was raised by two parents who believed in service. Both of them worked in government. My mother primarily worked with the transit system, which I later worked, at the same organization earlier in my career. But my father worked in the court system, where he helped vulnerable New Yorkers settle tenancy issues. So I like to say that service is part of my DNA. It was certainly planted in how I was raised, because Thanksgiving dinner for us was my sister and I would ride on the E train with my father. We would deliver meals to anyone in need before we returned home to eat at the dinner table. So when I reflect on my life, I'm just really thankful that really service has always lied at the center of how I've lived personally and professionally. As it relates to my work, in going to school, I never envisioned that I would do anything that my parents would do. But after graduating, I'm also a CUNY graduate. I went to Baruch College for my undergrad degree. I then was able to work at a nonprofit. At that time, it was a pretty small nonprofit. It was a human rights organization that focused on women and children, and I was the program coordinator for the program in Haiti. So it was an awesome experience at that time, being able to travel to Haiti, really talking with community leaders and helping them think through ways to receive aid, receive training for women and children who had been sexually abused, working with clinicians, working to build hospitals in towns of need. And so it was just a wonderful way to see how service is so important no matter where you live. At that time, I also had a host of student loans. So given the fact that it was a pretty small nonprofit, I had to make the responsible decision and transition into working in government. But I felt in government, I was able to earn a salary that allowed me to take care of myself as a young adult, but also I was still allowed to serve, but now more closer to home. And it really took me on a wonderful 27-and-a-half-year ride where I've had the wonderful opportunity to work at Department of Probation, Department of Juvenile Justice, where I worked with young people to address issues relating to recidivism, worked at the New York City Housing Authority, New York City Transit Authority, and ultimately to my most recent role as the commissioner at the Department for Citywide Administrative Services. So working at organizations big and small, working with different types of vulnerable populations, I feel that it's really served as a wonderful way to create this toolbox of skills that I can readily transition into the role that I currently have as the president and CEO at the Center for Urban Community Services.
I'm a recreational pilot, and the metaphor that comes to mind for you is air traffic controller, because you've worked all across these different parts of government. So what an ideal leader to be able to know how to help your stakeholders navigate government, certainly, but also private sector and NGOs.
I looked at the different opportunities that New York City government provided. I mean, there are about 80 agencies that report to the mayor of the city, and most people don't know that. But you really get to deal with all walks of life. You really get to see what it means to make a direct impact as opposed to making impacts on the administrative side. So you really get to see it all. And then you're working with government officials who may have a specific agenda. You're working with community community-based organizations that may not see eye to eye. So you're absolutely right. Serving the needs of your stakeholders, trying to achieve alignment, but every step of the way having to be this air traffic controller because it was always incoming.
Yeah. And then also you have in government the civil service, but then you have the electeds, right? So that's a regular changing of the guard too. So I can imagine it's
Absolutely.
also across time. Before we jump into the homelessness, I want to ask you though, the Haitian connection, was that just luck or is there a tie to the country? How did you get involved with that particular nonprofit when you did?
So it was luck. While I was in college, I worked at a retail organization that no longer exists. It was called The Body Shop. And so I worked there all throughout college because, at that time, I really needed a very flexible schedule. But one of the requirements of the job was that each shop had to have a community service project. And so I was serving as the assistant director. So it was my job to try to find the best community service
Cool.
project. And it happened to be a Friday night, and I was in a car accident.
Cool.
And then I remembered after receiving stitches at Bellevue Hospital, having to then travel into work to open the store because nobody can open the store. So that's the beauty of youth. Like you don't even think about that, at the time, right? So I saw that I had sent out a mailing to a few local organizations, and I received a response from an organization named Madre, which was very close by the store. And I saw that the executive director at the time, she had the same name as my kindergarten teacher. And so my natural curiosity, I called and I said, hi, my name is Dawn Pinnock. I used to go to PS 31, in the South Bronx. By any chance, are you, and I'm going to say her name, she's passed on. And I asked, are you Vivian Stromberg, who used to be a kindergarten teacher there? And she said,
Big
Dawn,
fan.
and it was my kindergarten teacher.
It's
And
amazing.
so I feel like it was like kind of the
The
universe
universe
placing
talking
me
to
on a
you.
certain path. And then I started working for my former kindergarten teacher. And so I worked at that nonprofit. And then she was looking for a program coordinator, someone that she could train, someone who was kind of fresh in the space of activism. And I was lucky enough to be selected to do that.
Wow. I love that story. Do you keep up with those ties today? And what's your sense of Haiti today?
And so, not as direct as I had given the work that I did. However, separately, just in my personal life, I do contribute to organizations that are still boots on the ground there at Haiti. The infrastructure was always something that was such a challenge, whether it was a natural disaster they were facing, whether it was various governmental entities being corrupt or overthrown. It just seemed as if the country could not get a break. But in every space, when folks have asked me about that work, I have to say it was some of the most rewarding, to see these women stand up for their communities despite trauma that they've faced, to be on the front lines against, armed forces, regardless of what that meant to themselves and their families. It really showed that regardless of where you live, if you're called to serve, if you're called to act, that, there will be someone there to lock arms with you. So absolutely. My heart still very much goes out and I do contribute in those other ways.
Awesome. I'll let you choose the next question. I want one of two, Dawn, because I would like you to sort of give us a macro intro of the topic of homelessness, or first an intro of CUCS, because they both will weave into each other. But I want to help our audience better understand homelessness and, in some ways, I think myth bust.
I will start off talking about CUCS because I do view my current role as an opportunity of a lifetime. So CUCS, as we mentioned, that's the acronym for the Center for Urban Community Services. It has enjoyed a 40 plus year history as being a trailblazer in the space of homelessness prevention and supportive housing here in New York City. We really consider ourselves to be an industry leader in three primary areas. We are a direct service provider as it relates to the provision of permanent supportive housing, transitional housing. Also, we have a client care model that really puts our client at the center of all of the work. And I think this also dovetails nicely into just the myth busting around homelessness. Folks who work at CUCS fully understand that there's no silver bullet to resolving homelessness. I think it is real easy. It's really, really easy for folks to think, well, someone is homeless because they've made every wrong decision, right? We've all made mistakes. We all deal with different types of trauma and instability in our lives. And CUCS employees fully understand there's a multitude of factors that contribute to someone's homelessness, which means that our response has to always be multi-pronged, it must be flexible, and it must keep the client at the center of everything we do.
Mhm.
So when I mentioned the CUCS care model, it is absolutely unique in that we work to, first of all, build the relationship. We view our relationship with our client as the first stage in treatment. So whether it's a street outreach worker who happens to see someone and they're trying to convince them to come outside, where we're quickly doing an assessment, or trying to just fill that immediate gap with either food or a clothing item, or whether someone is in a transitional site and we're preparing them to transition to a more permanent setting, or if they're placed in permanent housing, they're in treatment every step of the way. And integrated within our model, we have social workers, case managers, primary care physicians, psychiatrists that work as an interdisciplinary team in order to develop a care plan and to help that client achieve the goals that they've set out for themselves. So we're not driving the bus. We want our clients to be invested from the onset of the work. And in addition to serving as an industry leader, as a service provider, and the fact that our care model is so unique, we have now been able to gain a level of expertise where we are a nationally recognized training organization. We train other supportive housing providers, transitional providers, departments of mental health in LA, Louisiana. We train folks on our model because really our goal is to really look beyond us and to create the standard of care so that we're really making a dent in those systems of oppression and those disparate systems that leave individuals so vulnerable.
I don't know if it's myth busting, but what are the realities of homelessness? And we can say in the US, or we can just say New York right now.
I think that all of us, especially in New York City, not only do we feel that we are at a critical point as it relates to homelessness, and definitely post-pandemic, I think a lot of us had seen the spike in homelessness, the spike in untreated mental health, and how that has potentially impacted the quality of life for all New Yorkers. So when we talk about the myth busting, certainly we are seeing within our population not just the issue of folks not understanding all that's required to remain permanently housed, because I don't want to minimize how that in and of itself, right, as a New Yorker working, living in one of the most expensive cities in the world, right? Being able to get up each and every day, put one foot in front of the other, get on public transportation, traveling through this life as you're passing folks in need, others that may not, but really being able to stabilize your life. Like there's so much that goes along with that, right? So we're certainly seeing an increase in untreated mental health. And that is the reason why we have psychiatry as part of our model. Even when other organizations contract with us, psychiatry really is one of the top asks at this point, because the goal is to start treatment early and to be consistent in that treatment. And that requires a level of flexibility, as opposed to you trying to dictate how someone's care plan should be implemented. This is really about creating a relationship and that trust, where somebody believes that you are there to hear their story, you're there to not judge, but you're there to help offer a solution that helps them to rebuild their lives and gain stability. We're also seeing a spike as it relates to substance abuse as potentially like either an outgrowth of an untreated mental health, or just, individuals who are finding themselves wanting to
Escape.
exactly, thank you, to escape from just the daily challenges of life. So whether it's having to deal with being a single parent, if that means dealing with concerns about your health. So we really focus heavily on there being this wonderful balance around your primary care, your psychiatric health, but also making sure we're pairing that with those wraparound services and social safety net supports that are needed for you to stabilize your life and remain housed.
Can you give us sort of a demographic sense of, say, today, a snapshot in New York? I think the stereotype of a homeless person is a middle-aged man who is disheveled, and we see maybe on a subway platform or sidewalk. But we know that's not the case, right? It's so much more than that.
Right. So, while I don't have specific numbers, I do agree. That profile of what a homeless person looks like, that's not the reality. I mean, certainly after the pandemic, you saw that primarily folks of color, you had seen a spike there in terms of untreated mental health and also an increased number of individuals who are not classified as being either home insecure or homeless, but we also focus on families. So in our family sites, we see that in many cases, you see an increase in women who are single mothers. The ages, tend to be, like between late 20s, sometimes early 40s, where you see a mother who's trying to stabilize her family. And really, in our support of those types of families, this is the reason why our family model doesn't just focus on the head of household. We create separate care plans for every member of the household. Because as a parent, naturally, you go towards really wanting your children to be well, but we also have to impart how important it is for that head of household to be mentally well, to be stable in their finances, in order to best support their family.
What's the relationship with the New York City government and you? You're allies, but are you completely independent? Are you dependent on them financially? Are you dependent on New York State financially? How are you funded?
So the majority of our funding and the overwhelming majority of our funding really is tied to New York City government. Our primary partners are the Department of Homeless Services and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. This is really a part of like the original model when we started over 40 years ago. And we really work to provide certain services that frankly government does not have the capacity to. So we are brought on as a contractor and the overwhelming majority of our funding comes from there. We also have some unrestricted funding that comes into our organization and we receive a smaller slice of our funding from the state as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, again today on the Caring Economy, we have as our guest Dawn Pinnock, who's the newly appointed president and CEO of the Center for Urban Community Services. Dawn, I wonder if you could tell us how people can find you if they want to either donate, volunteer, or take advantage of your services. What's the best way?
So the best way is through our website. It's www.cucs.org. On our website, it provides our story, our history that spans back 40 years. It also provides opportunity for you to donate, and it really shows the breadth of work. It provides wonderful descriptions of our programs in the Bronx, Manhattan, and in Brooklyn, and also highlights just some of the training that we do here in New York City and across the nation.
Dawn, can you tell us a little bit about any private sector partners you work with? Any shout outs you want to give?
And so that is absolutely something that we're working on at this stage. Historically, we work mostly closely with our government partners. We have started what we consider to be like the CUCS Roadshow, where we're starting with some of our electeds, where we have a footprint in their districts. And we've asked them to also connect us with some private sector developers and partners, because our goal is absolutely to create and build more supportive housing. However, separate and apart from that, certainly Bea, who is the chief philanthropy officer at Trinity Church Foundation. She's been an amazing longstanding partner. Tracy Parizio at the Helmsley Foundation. She has also been such a supporter of our work. And, I'm really happy to have the opportunity to just shout out their longstanding support of CUCS and the ways that they've extended themselves to me even so early in my tenure.
So I'm imagining that you are sometimes in awkward situations in this anti-woke movement and the Trump administration's, threats of cutting funding, where someone might be on your left or right at a dinner or something, and they're just not going to believe the world is the way you believe it in terms of these people are lazy and they just can't get a job kind of thing. Do you hold your tongue? Do you try and bridge that conversation? Any tips for us on how to talk in an engaging way about homelessness versus wringing our hands or ignoring the conversation or blaming the other?
That's a wonderful question. So yes, it is a difficult line to maintain. However, I'm just not wired to be someone who holds my tongue, because I think that as opposed to being defensive, I choose to be informative.
Yes.
Because there are folks that I'm advocating for each and every day, whether that's my staff or if this is someone truly in need. And I also come to this space from lived experience. My father, I think one of the reasons why he was so compelled to serve in his life and to work in government is because, his sister, had been, addicted to drugs for a very long time and at one point had been formerly homeless. In fact, I met my aunt on the 5 train while my father was taking me to school. And there was something about that moment of watching him not walk past his sister that he had not seen in years, taking the opportunity to introduce his 8-year-old daughter to her aunt, regardless of what anyone else thought on that train car. And then to get her off of that train car and start calling on a payphone to find her a place for treatment. And I saw that in his eyes, he knew she still had worth. She deserved dignity. And he saw the humanity in her, regardless of what anyone else saw. Yeah. And so when I hear individuals talking about those people and what they didn't do, I really feel that it opens up a conversation around, have we really gotten to where we are just on our own? Have we all started at the same starting line? Like let's have the real conversation about that. It's not about blaming you. It's not about blaming me. It's about us understanding that there's a full world and we're a part of a community that can actually effectuate change if we just see the humanity in each other.
I'm glad to hear that. In the past couple of weeks, I've had 2 different occasions to sit with 2 different presidents or CEOs of community foundations. And affordable housing is the #1 concern across all these communities. And we know it is across the country. So we can say, based on the election results in November, that it's about immigration or inflation. But really, according to these 2 folks, and I tend to agree with this, what's really tugging on the heartstrings and upsetting people across the country is, am I going to be able to afford my housing? Am I going to ever be able to be part of that American dream that, you buy your home? So that's the one observation I've had, because that's just one step from homelessness, right? So that is a way, I think, to go from the universal to the particular. Because if you start to talk to someone about either, not a hypothetical person, but an individual who may be nameless or just first name, about how, yeah, she or he was a high functioning middle manager at a Fortune 500 company, and then XYZ happened, and now they're on the street, right? Then I have found an experience. You talk about addictions that way or homelessness, people start to see they've got those same people in their own lives, or worse, that they themselves have been there, that they're afraid. So I think actually when you can give those examples that bridge from that stereotype of a middle-aged man on the subway platform to a displaced middle-class worker from a Fortune 100 or 500 company, people can see themselves in it, and then they can start to feel comfortable in both sharing their own fears or concerns. Because I think, and there's a long-winded way of asking this question, but I would believe a very compelling factor for you or data point would be the amount of people who are on the borderline of bankruptcy, homelessness, foreclosure. Is that a fair statement?
It's absolutely a fair statement. And that's why, I continue to shake my hand as you were talking. I think that there are a couple of things that you said that were really, really important. When you're able to see yourself or to see people you know and you care about in someone else's experience, that helps to bridge the gap in an amazing way. It once again, puts a face on the problem, right? Or the issue. It also forces you and compels you to see the humanity in someone who may be in some ways like differently situated than what you currently are. So, and then it also helps to dispel the myths that we talked about earlier. And when you're talking about people who are living on the fringes, I think that is also another reason why in shifting to work at CUCS, I love the fact that they weren't focused on just one thing. I love the fact that they fully embrace and understand that there's no silver bullet, there's no one solution. And so even part of our work is that education around other supports and other subsidies and potentially other opportunities that folks have to stabilize themselves financially. So we offer, workplace readiness, we offer financial literacy, we connect folks with other groups that do that work really well, or also making those connections with those federal, state, and local entities that may have funding as of today. And I understand we're operating in uncertain times, but to also make that link so that they can then benefit from those services and supports to help them stabilize themselves financially.
Do you provide job placement services for your homeless population?
So we do. It's definitely at a smaller scale. That's something that we're also looking to beef up. So part of our work in terms of relationship building and stakeholder management is, making ourselves available to employers. So we talk about certain skill sets, whether it's helping someone really have the best interviewing skills, or resume workshops, or learning how to use even the basic functionality with a computer. All of those skill sets really serve as the building blocks for someone being gainfully employed. And consistent employment, as you know, creates a more stable financial foundation. So
Yeah.
that is a smaller part of our portfolio as well.
The last question I want to ask you is the one I always ask everybody, which is any pearls of wisdom that Don Pinnock has gleaned?
So, yes, I do sound like a bit of a broken record, but I feel that these three things have served me well. I always say, as you climb, continue to lift. As being the first woman to lead this organization, the first person of color to lead this organization, I know I stand on the shoulders of so many, and I keep that top of mind. And so when I just see that spark of interest, or if I see someone who wants to engage and learn and stretch themselves, I feel that as I advance, whether it's across sectors or within a company, I always seek to bring people along with me, because it takes all of us to really effectuate change when we're dealing with vulnerable populations. I also love Oscar Wilde's statement, and my auntie, she actually has this in her signature line when she sends an email, and I believe it says, "Be yourself. Everyone else is taken." As a very precocious and naturally curious child, I'm sure I drove my parents crazy. And it was always instilled in me very early to be myself and to accept myself and to know that I belong in every space, even if it's not been communicated to me that I do belong. Having that self-awareness and that confidence in myself has absolutely served me well, even when I've been scared to push myself forward. And then lastly, Shirley Chisholm, when she says, service is the rent we pay for the privilege of living on this earth. Like, it is a privilege to lead CUCS. It is an honor to be someone who's been able to navigate a life and to be able to impart their knowledge and to roll my sleeves up to do the hard work to benefit other New Yorkers. And so really my ultimate goal as I live, out these all these mantras is to see this model replicated. I think that, working within your organization as opposed to working across the aisle is limiting. And if we want to work towards the elimination of homelessness and to help individuals gain stability in their lives and rise from poverty and be healthy, it really takes that we are willing to replicate what works and what's impactful so we can make a systemic change.
Here, here. I love everything you said. I do believe that service is the only way to a fulfilling life and legacy. And that, we are all on this planet to serve, to be of service to others, not just ourselves. I strongly believe more and more that the old systems and organizations, many of them have failed us. Many of them have not done what we need them to do, whether it's politics or journalism or banking or philanthropy. So I really do believe that it's the most exciting time in history. And this is even before you add in AI, which is another compounding factor, because what was can no longer be. So how are we going to move forward and shape it? And it's going to have to be that collaborative way. So as I
Absolutely.
said, I'm a proponent of the private sector, but also I believe through my podcast and other ways, I'm trying to connect those different ways and provoke different thinking because no one entity, organization, or individual can solve for any of these things. Even our president might think he can solve everything in a day. Showing my bias there. So I very much support you and salute you in your effort, and I can't wait to see you continue to soar.
Thank you. And I want to just extend my appreciation for you utilizing your platform to share these stories. I was thrilled when I found out I had the opportunity to talk to you. I know you've been around for what, about 14 seasons now. And so, I really feel honored to be amongst, the leaders that you've talked to and that you've shared this platform with. So thank you, Toby.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank again our guest today, Dawn Pinnock. She's the awesome newish CEO and president of the Center for Urban Community Services, or CUCS, here in New York, a decades-long service provider addressing homelessness, the crisis we have, the crisis we will eradicate one day. Dawn Pinnock, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Toby.
And Dawn, tell us one last time how to be in touch with you.
You can reach out to me and to my organization at www.cucs.org.
Thank you again and have an awesome day.
You do the same.